how do you actually no-dig garden throughout the year?
I suppose by doing not a lot.
A soil bacteria called Mycobacteria vaccae. It was used in a study. It did do something really interesting, which is it made the patients feel better. I'm going to talk about Soil Your Undies.
Soil's one of those things that I've kind of grown to excite me.
Well, grab yourself a pair of pants.
They don't sell underwear in charity shops, do they? I've never tried to buy them.
Will you take up the challenge to soil your undies? Jamie's like inside's dying.
I'm Jamie Walton, otherwise known as Nettles and Petals.
And I'm Martha Swales, also known as Marf's Kitchen Garden.
And welcome to Homegrown, our very own podcast.
If you don't know us, we're both gardeners with very different backgrounds. I got into gardening because I love growing food, and I'm all about packing my little London garden with as much edible stuff as possible.
And I'm an ecological horticulturalist, which is a fancy way of saying that I grow food in line with nature up in North Yorkshire.
And on Homegrown, we're going to be celebrating the best of growing from a window box all the way up to a full-size allotment.
We'll prove that you don't need a huge amount of space to grow a meaningful amount of food.
Welcome to Homegrown. We're back again. And this time, we're going to talk a little bit about soil.
Yeah, all about soil, actually. A lot about soil.
I know, everyone is very excited. Actually, can I just say, the first time I met you, I told you about how I was reading a book about soil.
Yeah,
it's in my bag, actually. I've used it quite heavily for my research this week. So I can promise you there is some very exciting stuff in store.
Yeah, and I think soil's one of those things that I've kind of just grown to excite me. As in, before I started growing my own food, I thought of soil as kind of essentially an inert kind of medium in which plants grew. I didn't really think about kind of the life within.
Oh my goodness.
And then over time, I've obviously started to understand and appreciate the life within the soil, how much there is. And now that's kind of the core focus of my growing practice, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, well, I think especially when you're on a much bigger scale, like I would love to just grow things in the ground all the time. I've got lots of pots and containers and all sorts of things. But I am still obsessed with soil and how entwined we are with soil and all of our evolutionary history. But before we get into the very exciting deep dive on soil, how have you been?
Burnout. We're into October now. Herbal teas, and I always get burnout in kind of September. You know, as a grower, content creator, and everything that goes along with that. I spend at least half of September sniffly and on the elderberry tea. It's a good job that elderberries are out and I can make my elderberry syrup around that time. But yeah.
We actually had to miss a podcast recording because you were so sick the other week. But I'm very glad that you're feeling better.
Yeah, better enough
to do this.
With my herbal teas.
I'm on the herbal tea as well. And yet again, I've forgotten to bring my own mug. I'm one day going to manage it because I have got a very excellent collection of mugs.
This has become my pod mug.
Pod mug.
Yeah.
Well, today I am the queen. No, I actually really can totally relate to what you're saying because I always think the garden's a bit reflective of my kind of general mood. And when I look out at this time of year, sort of autumn, and everything is tired, I'm pretty tired. I'm ready. Yeah. This is why I get so excited, and I say this all the time about autumn, because I am ready to just snuggle up indoors and not be thinking, oh, the sun's come out, it's been another hot day, everything in my pots is dried up, oh no, I've killed all the seedlings in my greenhouse, etc. So a little bit of respite round the corner. And actually, of course, really a very relevant time of year to be thinking about what we're going to be doing with the soil. But before we get onto that, obviously we like to start every episode with a bit of trivia.
A bit of trivia.
I know we've talked about soil, but actually this episode is really about a method called no-dig.
Yeah, I suppose no-dig versus dig and why you might not want to dig. I suppose we generally about soil, but also just about kind of soil maintenance and preparation and things. Yeah.
Did you dig when you started growing?
No.
You just started off
Never
top
been a
of the
digger.
class, right from the beginning.
Never been a digger. Started organic and no dig, yeah.
what did I start as? Absolute chaos. No, I did a lot of digging.
Did you?
Oh, I didn't know what was going on. This was like 15 years ago. And I was just like, got an allotment, let's go. And so the sort of traditional wisdom, and I still think was in the books that I had at the time, is that when you prepared an allotment plot, you would like double dig it.
Double dig, yeah.
So you basically, both methods involve incorporating organic matter and feeding the soil. But with digging, you dig a trench and then like you dig one bit back into the trench and you have to dig it 2 spades deep across the whole plot. And then you're meant to really break up the soil. Like Jamie's like inside's dying. You really have to break up the soil and really, you know, and then over the winter you hope the frost just really freezes the soil into nice, like fine grain.
It destroys everything. Yeah.
After
it
like,
does make it this inert medium that plants don't grow in,
yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, one of your tips was like, keep your soil absolutely covered over winter to protect it. And that is literally the opposite of what they used to do, which is just absolutely freeze it until it's dust. But yeah, no, I've got there in the end. I'm a no digger and I have been for like years now, really. I think it's pretty popular in the allotment movement.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the term no dig can be a little, if you're just starting out, the term no dig can be a little bit definitive. Like as in you could think, for example, if you need to dig up a potato or a carrot, do you know, are you allowed to do that? So I tend to use minimal disturbance. It doesn't have as much of, it's not as catchy, is it? But like minimal disturbance method. So you're kind of minimizing soil disturbance rather than just not digging. Because you're not double digging, but you're also just kind of you can do some digging if necessary.
Yeah.
But even with potatoes now, I don't really plant them.
Do you stick them and then put compost on top?
Yeah, or even hay or straw mulch.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And they'll just kind of more or less just grow on the soil surface. You don't even have to dig them up. Right,
I'm going to talk about a little soil experiment called Soil Your Undies. Okay.
I have heard of this experiment. I haven't done it.
Well, here's a great opportunity. It is better to soil your undies in the summer, but I'll explain the context. There's this soil test you can do called Soil Your Undies. And the important thing to note is that soil is obviously extremely alive. And that's something we're really going to talk about as we get through this week's episode. It is packed with fungi, nematodes, bacteria, protozoa. Like it is alive.
They say within a teaspoon of healthy soil, you'd have more life, more microbes than humans on Earth.
Oh, yeah.
It's easily. So that's how much life we're talking.
Yeah, it's like phenomenal. And actually the amount of life there is reflective of how healthy your soil is. So, for example, in woodlands, like you have a really high proportion of fungi and we want more fungi in our soil. It's actually really good for plants, but we have much less in the kind of soil that we cultivate in our gardens. And essentially what all of this life does is they're interacting and processing, breaking things down and moving them around and decomposing stuff. And so when there is more life in your soil, it's more active. And how can you measure how active your soil is?
By?
Well, grab yourself a pair of pants. So this is actually something you can do. I've read about this, but I also went to an art exhibition where they had got people to bury bits of cotton cloth in different places and then they displayed them. So this is quite an idea that's been around for a while and I definitely want to give it a go. And Jamie, I'm going to set you the challenge of having a go as well. Okay. Buy yourself 2 pairs of pants or... Maybe nip to the
charity shop and grab yourself some. Oh, that's a bit gross though, isn't it, I suppose? They don't sell underwear in charity shops, do they? I don't know, I've never tried to buy them. I
think if you nip to the charity shop to try and buy some secondhand pants, you might not get very far.
No. Or if you've got some old ones yourself.
Yeah, old pants is probably the best thing to do. Or in fact, you can use just any piece of like plain cotton. The pants obviously adds an element of humour, but we're very sustainable on this podcast and we don't recommend going out and buying brand new pants just to do this.
Plant your pants.
Exactly. So you need some cotton fabric, ideally white cotton fabric, 2 pieces, same size. And what you're going to do is bury them in 2 different spots in your garden. So you might put one in the veg bed, you might put another like under a tree or in a flower bed, places that have different that you've done different things to, basically. So you bury it about 4 to 6 inches deep. So that's 10 centimetres. That's the most active layer of soil. You want it to be somewhere there's also moisture as well, so where you're like watering. And the benefit of the pants is that if you've got an elasticated waistband, you can leave them above the soil so you can see where. If you're just using a piece of fabric, I suggest you mark it or like attach it to something so you can see, because it may entirely break down. Leave it for a couple of months.
You're hoping it will.
Well, you hope that's exactly it. So you leave it for a couple of months. If you're impatient or you think you've got really good soil, you can check it sooner, and it's better to do it in the summer. And basically what's going to happen is if your soil is thriving and alive and full of life, it will break down the cotton. And in places where there's much less soil life, it will take longer to break it down. So you can bury it in 2 different places, and then you can take it out and have a look and see. Might nearly all be gone. It might all be there. If you're pulling your whole pair of pants back out after 2 months, your soil's not looking good, I'm afraid.
Put them back in the drawer and away you go.
Yeah. And then what you're going to need to do is really feed that soil. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. No Dig essentially is about how you feed the soil, and feeding the soil is all about feeding all of those little microorganisms that would eat up your pants.
Yeah. And it's important, you obviously mentioned it has to be cotton. It can't be like nylon or polyester. Or
it has to be cotton, because it needs to be an organic fibre, because with all the will in the world, I'm sure there are some microorganisms that could just about munch through a bit of plastic, but not many. And you're just going to end up with loads of plastic in your soil. So
I'm pretty sure actually that I saw a post about they've discovered one that can.
Yeah, I think there's things that can eat
plastic, so they're going to kind of try and harness that in some way, shape or form to overcome our plastic problem.
We've got to do something. Got to get all the plastic and put it in the same place for starters, rather than just like floating around absolutely everywhere. So, Jamie, this brings me to the conclusion of my trivia test. Will you take up the challenge to soil your undies?
I will soil. Yes, yeah, I will.
I'll do it too.
Okay. And in 2 months' time, we can come back.
We can compare.
Okay.
Yeah, as I do say, it is better over the summer, but...
I mean, I'm imagining that mine aren't going to disappear too quickly because it's a new space that's been treated pretty badly for years. So, although it's kind of... I've noticed a big difference since February when I started. So.
What would be interesting is because you haven't cultivated the entire space yet, have you? If
No.
you put one where you haven't done anything yet and one where you have started and then did a comparison, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
And if you fancy soiling your undies at home too, you can send us a picture to homegrown@joypeddlers.com. But make sure the one's from the garden, please.
And if you're listening in the Southern Hemisphere, now is a great time to get out and soil your undies. Right, should we get into this week's topic?
Sounds good.
So, Jamie, you're a no-dig purist, as we've discovered.
Purist.
So, can you lay out for everybody listening what it is?
Well, we kind of briefly touched on it, didn't we? That it's that the dig in no dig refers to double digging, which is a traditional method that coincides really with the chemical kind of fertilizer era as well. So that you essentially dig your soil, destroy the life within, and then have to use fertilizers to then kind of grow anything in it, really. Yeah. It's a lazy way of gardening as well, which I like, because you essentially you don't have to ever dig again, which I know a lot of allotmenteers. I mean, I've never dug because I discovered the work of a few kind of no-dig pioneers like Charles Dowding and Richard Perkins and people like that. And there are others, but Charles is kind of probably known as the godfather of no-dig in the UK, isn't he?
Yeah.
So I kind of followed his work from the beginning. So I've never dug, but I've seen people doing it, and it's a lot of work.
Well, I have dug, and I mean, I think actually the worst job every spring when I first got my allotment was which isn't exactly digging the bed to prepare it, but was digging potato trenches.
Yeah.
And and I had so my first allotment in London was solid clay. I mean, I would be digging in the winter and it would just stick everywhere. You could roll it into balls and juggle with it. It was you could make a
some
full
pottery.
dinner set out
Yeah,
of
yeah.
it. Like it's heavy clay. And so when I used to dig trenches to plant my potatoes, and even that was just back-breaking. Yeah, I mean, my back hurt more doing that than it does,
Yeah, well, I mean,
pulling a bus.
when I first started pulling a bus, which you do.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
When I first started my own allotment in my back garden many years ago, the next door neighbour had one too, and he was an older guy following traditional kind of dig methods, and he would spend hours, if not days, digging over his entire plot at the end of every season. And then after a few years of kind of watching me not do it, he started to question what he was doing, because obviously I was getting better. Well, not obviously, but I was getting better results than him as well from not doing it. So, and we'd use the same amount of compost, really. I mean, initially in the first year, there's a bit of an investment there, and I think that's one of the big things of note. Every time I do a talk or speak to people, it's a question that comes up that it's too expensive, or is there a cheaper way of starting a no-dig bed?
So just for context, this is that when you start no-dig, you don't have to dig, but you still need to feed the soil. I think the one thing about traditional methods is that often the digging did involve digging in manure or compost. So they got that bit right, was like they're still kind of putting organic matter into the soil, but yeah, they thought it had to be really thoroughly dug in. Whereas what you do with no dig is you can literally start with a piece of grass, can't you? Lay cardboard down, pile your compost on top, and just leave it to kind of get incorporated into the soil naturally.
Yeah, I think that initial. I mean, the thing is, obviously, if you're digging or you're using a tractor to till or turn or plough, then you can turn a grassy area into a plantable space quite quickly. But then again, you can do the same thing with mulching. If it's a large area, I sometimes use hay or straw and just kind of, I'd put that down now, and then in spring,
just plant straight into it
because it'll have broken down by then. So, and then you've essentially suppressed any vegetation that was there. So if you've got a lawn or just a bed of weeds, then you can add. So if you want to save on the compost costs, you could do that now. Then you won't need as much compost in spring.
That's a really good tip, because I have the same problem. So I guess if you're new to this and you're like, I'm starting a veg bed for the first time, and actually a lot of traditional courses will still say that veg preparation is, digging it all over and raking it to a fine till.
Yeah.
You know what? Anyway, moving on from that. I got 2 new beds in a community garden this year, and I suppose if you were doing it the traditional way, you'd start digging the whole thing over from one end to the other, and you would be digging in compost if you're doing it at least in an organic dig way. But instead, I collected loads of cardboard boxes and you lay it all down, but you still have to get a lot of compost, don't you, to get started? But the straw things are really good idea.
Yeah, but I mean, if you don't have the time to be able to do that, compost is your best option because you can plant straight into it in spring. But you do want 4 to 6 inches covering the entire area. So you'd probably put down your cardboard and then your 4 to 6 inches of compost. And if you're covering a large area, it does add up.
So many,
but you just got to see it as an investment in that first year, because you don't have to do that again. You'll just have to put a small amount, year on year after that, and hopefully you can kind of create enough compost in your own space to replenish year after year. But it's just your first year, you need 4 to 6 inches just to get that initial suppression.
Yeah, so it's perfect if you're setting up a veg bed that in a place, say you've just moved into your forever home and you're looking at the garden and you think, I always wanted to put a veg bed in. Well, for starters, you don't have to do, if you're doing things like raised beds, which people have done a lot of over the years, that's going and buying loads of stuff and filling it up. But it's not nearly, I think, as costly or as labour intensive as setting up and filling a load of raised beds. It's kind of in between, rather than just going out and digging a hole and planting something in it, which you'll find probably doesn't work.
Well, that's the thing. It also, it's an investment, but it sets you up to not to fail as well. Because if you put enough down, then you won't really have too much weed pressure, which is a massive plus. And you'll be adding all that organic matter to the soil, so you'll get better results. Plants will grow in it better than they would elsewhere. So you kind of set yourself up to win, which is, when you're first starting out, important. I
think because we've been doing this for so long, and there's so many things we kind of have come to know that it's easy to forget that when you very first start, it's important to know if you have just got a new garden and you've got like a patch of grass, there is probably not going to be nearly enough nutrients and organic matter in that soil for you to just dig it over and start growing veg in. And if you look with envy at people who are sharing videos of how fantastic their harvests are. Yeah. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about, I do that to like, you know, Charles Dowding, who's been growing incredible veg for like 30 years. But like those kind of plants don't just pop out of soil that is just inert in your garden anyway. You need to feed the soil and it needs to be full of organic matter. And I know we've talked about the soil your undies already, and that is kind of, it's those things they're eating your pants that you're feeding. It's tiny little worms and fungi and bacteria. But what's important to know about them is in the process of breaking down the organic matter that you feed them, they release the nutrients that your plants need to grow. So it's not just being like, you know, the nitrogen and all of those kind of like minerals and things. It's what the stuff that they need is being released by the soil. And so that's why it replaces adding artificial fertilizers, or even like having to put like water on organic ones. If you feed the soil, actually that organic matter is being broken down and fed to your plants, and that's why you do it, right?
Yeah, and I mean you can, because if you use chemical fertilizer, or if you even use organic fertilizer, so you make your own comfrey tea, nettle tea, or seaweed, you essentially bypass those natural processes so that you end up with a dependency on them. So then you have to continually use them year after year. And if you let the soil life do that for you, then that's permanent.
I think an important distinct, because obviously no dig is primarily for people who are going to be gardening in the ground. And I do a lot of gardening in containers and window boxes. And if I was thinking about when I feed my garden, all of my veg beds that I add compost to every year, I don't need to feed them. If I've got a pot with a tomato or an aubergine in it, I will give it an organic feed because there's not enough soil and active, you know, soil life in the pot, and I'm not feeding the soil every year. And so that's quite a useful distinction, I think, is that the soil feeding replaces having to feed your plants with something out of a bottle, basically. Yeah. But if you can't feed your soil, or if it's in a really small container, then that's why you might bump it up. But no dig, I think in a way, people have this idea that when you use compost once in a container that you have to get rid of it. I actually think, especially now that peat-free composts are full of things like wood and like all sorts of things that haven't yet been broken down, I'm actually convinced that the longer I keep my compost, the better it's going to be, because old compost, when I'm looking at it, is full of worms. It's almost like it's being composted, because often the stuff you buy hasn't really been composted fully yet. Yeah. And this is just something that I have no idea. I'm just got this theory that if you can just add a bit more fresh compost and like reuse it in your container, and maybe even just plant into the container without taking it out, you're kind of doing a mini version of no dig.
Yeah, I rarely empty them. I just add another couple of inches of fresh compost.
Because I think that's also like when you're doing a container garden, like there is so much traditional wisdom that is so by the book. And actually, I think that's what drew me to like the thing that Charles Dowding, who we've talked about, is the kind of popularised no dig, is there's so many things where he said, oh yeah, you can chuck this weed in your compost, or you don't have to clean all your trays out, because if your soil is alive and your garden has resilience, you don't have to be so careful, because it's kind of a living, breathing thing. And that's kind of what drew me to it, is like the idea you'd buy a bag of compost and plant a plant in it for one season and then you're supposed to chuck it all out. It's absolutely crazy, like to me anyway. So it's kind of just more.
And if I ever do empty them, I just empty them into the compost too.
Oh yeah, I sometimes put them on my beds. That's what I'll do if I'm like, onto the beds, into the compost bin. Never would chuck it out. No. And you can make kind of compost teas and inoculants as well so that you can essentially water in life rather than just kind of seaweed or nettles. You can essentially inoculate your soil with life, which is something I'd do 2 or 3 times a year. And so you make it with your compost tea. What are the kind of key things you have to do in a no-dig garden? So you've got your veg patch, you've set it up, as we've said, cardboard, compost on top. And then how do you actually no-dig garden throughout the year?
I suppose by doing not a lot. So if you say, for example, you're just setting up your beds, you put your compost down, or you put your cardboard down. And if you say, for example, you were doing it on a lawn, cut that down as low to the ground as you can with like a lawnmower or whatever. Then put your cardboard down if you want to use cardboard. You don't have to use cardboard if you don't need to. And obviously there's questions about things in cardboard too. So I think just to briefly mention, if you have like staples, lots of ink, sellotape, like plastic.
Or anything glossy or anything printed.
You don't want to be using that. But if it's just kind of standard kind of cardboard.
So for context, this is that there has been discussion around whether there are chemicals in the cardboard that will leach into your soil that will be bad for you, and
bad for the soil, and there are to a degree, but they're very, very insignificant, and you'd only be doing that once anyway to create the bed. Yeah. So long term, there's no real negative effects. Yeah. If you're just using your standard cardboard, a lot of cardboards are stuck together with kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Glue. Yeah, but it's like glues, but that are naturally like starch based.
Oh, right, yeah.
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 So they don't really have a massively negative effect long term. So you've got your cardboard down, then you've got your compost down, and the thing about using compost straight away is that you can then just plant straight into it in spring. If you were planting, say, like a larger plant with a really developed root system, then you'd maybe want to create a little hole in that cardboard too, so then its roots can go down into the soil below. Yeah. But if it's just a little seedling and you've got 6 inches of compost, you could just put it into the compost, and over the kind of first maybe 2 or 3 weeks, that cardboard will disintegrate, or start to anyway, so that when the roots reach it, they'll penetrate through anyway.
I think that's a really important point, because I've done videos about no dig before, and I think a lot of people were like, but you've just put down a big sheet of cardboard. Like, the idea is that the cardboard breaks down, and also when you're laying it, you can water it, softens it, and
decomposition.
But the point of the cardboard is it does suppress some of the weeds and just gives you a head start, so that what you plant on top has a bit of an advantage, can get growing. So much of when it comes to growing plants is that window when they're tiny and vulnerable. If you can protect them then, and that's from competition, pests, then they establish, and after that plants are so much easier to grow. That first stage is the hardest, and that's why having the cardboard and a nice clear patch of compost, and you pop your seeds in, it's very satisfying actually when you set up a new bed, and you can, if you've grown your own little plug plants, whack them all in. And I did this for a friend who was just about to have a baby, and we went to the garden centre, and I came back, and we just a few new bags of compost, and all the plug plants went in, and even with a small baby, they've been picking veg from the garden. It's just been very sweet.
Nice. It's the competition as well, because obviously you're suppressing the existing vegetation, and then the seedlings that you plant won't be outcompeted by other things that probably would. Like if dandelions grew in the same spot, they would outcompete them. So
straight away,
yeah. So and then once you've got the plants in, they'll get growing, and you can then just kind of do multiple successions in that first year. You can add some inoculants if you want to add a bit more soil life. And then at the end of the year, I'd just add a small amount of compost again, maybe less than an inch, something like that.
And in terms of harvesting, obviously if you're pulling up like a beetroot or a carrot, you pull it up. But other things, if they've got roots, so you're harvesting like a fennel bulb, or I don't know, you just cut them off at the base.
Yeah, and leave those roots in the ground.
There's a lot of incredible interactions that go on between roots and soil life, and it's better to leave the roots in, right? So you just cut them off, leave those roots in the soil. They will gradually break down. They also create aeration as they break down. And that's kind of, it's basically like mimicking nature, right?
Yeah, and again, minimizing disturbance, because if you pull that up, you're going to kind of create a big hole and damage all those connections that have been formed. Exactly.
So, and when it comes to weeding, hopefully you don't have any, but if you haven't put enough compost on top, which if you're being a bit tight like I, sometimes they start popping up. Or if there's like might be some pretty big rooted weeds, you should ideally pull out anything kind of perennial or deep rooted. But if you haven't, it starts popping up.
Yeah. Pull them up. Try and get as much of the root out as you can.
Yeah.
So the new community garden, tons of docks, thistles, bindweed, horsetail, all favourites. But I dug up most of the kind of big docks because the root systems are just enormous. But then, you're gonna have some weed pressure. Yeah, really, no matter what. It might be couch grass, it might be bindweed. But the more you keep pulling, they don't have endless energy in the root system, and if you keep pulling them as soon as you see them, they'll die back. Yeah, and for smaller seedlings, if anything's popping up, you just run a hoe over it, and that just cuts more down. I just leave them on top of the soil, and after kind of and the spaces are set up after maybe in the third year, there's pretty much no weeding needed. So there you go. The lazy way to garden, a bit more work at the beginning, and then after that, it really is just ticks over. It feeds itself. You put a bit of compost on every year, and probably say not even that much more work. I'd say it's just more, maybe a little bit more input. Expense and input. Yeah, definitely. Then if you can create systems where you then create your own inputs going forward, then that's ideal. So enough compost or compost tea or whatever, then that's the ideal scenario. Obviously, if you have a very small space, it might not be viable, but yeah, that's the goal. Yeah, my veg beds in my garden are very small, and they're no dig. And another important thing about no dig, and this is kind of more on a large agricultural scale, is that digging over soil and ploughing releases huge amounts of carbon. And I saw a really interesting graph that showed that the levels of CO2 being released globally really peak when the northern hemisphere is in tilling, like when they're tilling all the soil at the same time, because it's just releasing huge amounts of carbon. And there are large-scale agricultural no-dig machines where instead of tilling now, they can plant seeds directly into like cut crops and things like that, because it's basically as much about resilience and climate change and soil health, and it kind of all ties in together. I guess it's just do less harm and interfere and intervene less. The soil erosion is a massive global issue, and soil degradation. You'll see these kind of scary headlines about how many years we've got left before we have no more topsoil, and so even in your own garden, you can do your own little bit. Do your bit. Takes sometimes hundreds of years to produce a centimetre or two of soil, so protect it. But I guess no dig is a small scale version of just cultivating food in a more ecological and sustainable way, I think. Yeah. So this is the point in the podcast where I like to do a little deep dive, whether that be history, science, folklore. And this week I've gone back to a book that I told you about the first time I ever met you. And it's called Soil by Matthew Evans. And it's just a great book about how incredible... I still haven't picked it up. You can have my copy. Yeah, I'll borrow yours. It sort of covers all the incredible aspects of soil, touches on no dig, and the way that we've kind of evolved with soil and what's going on in the soil, and how it can basically be the key to a lot of big ecological problems we're facing. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk specifically about some amazing things that the things living in the soil can do. Right. So soil is alive, as we have covered extensively, and it is full of lots of microorganisms, whether that be fungi, bacteria, protozoa, which are single-celled, slightly larger organisms. And the power and potential locked in the soil of what all of those things can do for us and already do for us is kind of astronomical. And if you think about it, we have obviously evolved with soil for many millions of years. Lots of the microorganisms that live in our gut, for example, originate from soil. 70 to 80% of all antibiotics that we use come from soil microbes. So if you've had an infection and you've taken antibiotics, it's probably thanks to soil that we've even got that medicine in the first place. Instead. Yeah, well, I mean... Maybe don't do that. And basically, I was going to pick out 3 interesting things about soil microorganisms this week. And as I say, they are in Matthew Evans' book about soil. And there's lots of other very fascinating examples, but there are 3 things that I thought I would kick off with. So the first one is a soil bacteria called
Mycobacteria vaccae. And it's a really interesting one. It was used in a study, I think in about 2004, where a lady called Mary O'Brien injected it into cancer patients. And there was lots of science to back up why she was doing this in the first place. There'd been some other interesting studies about the effect it had on the body. And the aim was to see if it did anything in relation to the lung cancer. It's an interesting one because it sort of didn't work, but it did reveal something very interesting, which happens in science all the time. And what it didn't work on was the cancer. So it didn't treat it or cure it in any way. But it did do something really interesting, which is it made the patients feel better. They felt less pain. They felt happier. They generally had like a more positive outlook, even though they were not, a lot of them were, terminally ill.
Yeah.
And it turned out that this soil bacteria effectively acts like an antidepressant. It is working on those neurons that release serotonin. So people could think more clearly, they felt more positive, and they also felt less pain.
Yeah.
So the point about that is, obviously going out into the garden, we know, makes people feel better, but you're literally like breathing in like bacteria that makes you feel good. Another study that they did on mice showed that it reduced the likelihood of developing a stress response after a stressful event if they had been exposed to this soil bacteria. So I just think it's a really interesting idea because so many things about why we garden aren't particularly measurable.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting when you start to see the mechanisms by which some of that might be possible.
Yeah, because you just feel as though, well, being outside in nature, hands in the soil, you would say that would make you feel better. But to see it in a scientific study being shown that what it actually does, and that it does increase your serotonin, et cetera, it's pretty cool.
I think especially what's interesting about it is, it's not just inert, it's the things living in the soil.
Yeah.
That's what generates all those incredible smells when rain hits the soil. It's to do with things that those microorganisms are emitting and generating. And so it's just it just reinforces the idea that soil is not inert. And I think it ties in so well with No Dig because, you're feeding the life in the soil and, getting a sense of what some of those things are capable of doing is really interesting. And the other thing, of course, is that interaction with soil improves your immune system. And there used to be a theory that was kind of like, when you said eat some soil, it was like the hygiene theory, the idea that it's almost you're exposing yourself to bad bacteria and that makes you stronger. But now they call it the old friends model. And it's the idea actually that we have evolved with a lot of this bacteria that and microorganisms that are not harmful to us at all, but it's still important that we interact with them in order to develop our own immunity. Children who grew up on farms, obviously more closely interacting with soil and nature, tend to have less prevalence of autoimmune conditions, things like asthma and eczema. And a lot of that is to do with being exposed to soil.
Well, it's an area that we've only just started to discover, really. It's kind of like the depths of the sea. We don't know a huge amount about it yet, but there's so much to discover. It's
like the Mariana Trench of gardening, isn't it?
Yeah, and also with B12, vitamin B12, it's one of those things that kind of, as someone who's plant-based or vegan, if you're vegan, you tend to have to, or you're told that you should take B12 supplements because you're not getting it from the meat source. But actually, I'm pretty certain that it derives from the soil, so that you're essentially having it as a secondary source from the animals that have been eating the soil, the grass, the soil, and then you're absorbing it through them.
Secondhand.
Because because we don't really generally pull up a carrot out of the ground and then eat it without it going through all sorts of chemical washes and things. If you're buying from a supermarket, you're not interacting. You're not exposed to the aspect of the soil.
Yeah.
So if you're growing your own and you're growing organically and you're not too worried about the soil and you're consuming it, then actually it's the kind of primary source of that.
That's very interesting. Didn't know that. Wow, I've eaten a few carrots pretty much
straight off the ground.
We're not saying you shouldn't wash your veg.
If you want to.
Okay, we're on to my final soil fact. Can you bear another one? Okay, this is about a soil bacteria called P. syringae, and it causes bacterial leaf blight. I think particularly in wheat, whereas obviously as a gardener I thought of like tomatoes, potatoes. I don't think it's necessarily the same thing, but you can imagine it causes blight. And blight, as we know, often happens when it's like damp and wet. So when rain hits the soil, a lot of bacteria and things is released back into the atmosphere. And when they were doing a study on the spread of bacterial leaf blight, a guy went up in an aeroplane and he stuck a petri dish out the window and caught some of the air as they were flying. And he got frostbite on his hand, actually, as he was catching a sample of the air because they'd managed to get rid of the leaf blight and it kept coming back. And they were like, where is it coming from? Like, we've got rid of it and it keeps reappearing. Anyway, takes his petri dish back and cultures it. And of course, they find that the air above the fields is full of the bacteria P. syringae that causes the leaf blight. But more interestingly, when they then looked at particularly hailstones, so obviously when rain starts to condense, it has to condense around something. So traditionally people thought it might be dust or bits of minerals like up in the atmosphere that allows the water to start condensing and form either a raindrop or a hailstone that then comes down as precipitation. But it turns out that one of the most effective things for being the nucleus of a raindrop or hailstone, particularly between certain temperature ranges, is in fact bacteria, and especially P. syringae, which obviously has a very vested interest on being able to rain back down onto the crops that it wants to infect. So there's this idea that there's an interaction between the bacteria and rain, and in places where your soil is perhaps not as alive, you might have different distributions of rain. Obviously not everyone wants to have bacterial leaf blight, but it's just a really interesting idea that at the core of so many hailstones and raindrops all over the world, and lots of different bacteria as well, is forming around these soil bacteria.
That's pretty cool.
In fact, it's so effective at forming the nucleus for hailstones that they now use a denatured version in snow machines to create like synthetic snow.
There you go.
So there you go. Soil life can make you happy, it can improve your immune system, and it can make it rain.
That's exciting. So I don't know about you at home, but I thoroughly enjoyed Martha's Fun Fact Corner this week.
Thank you very much.
And if you have any questions or observations or anything that you'd like Martha to cover, you can send us an email at homegrown@joypeddlers.com. I'm starting to remember our email now.
And of course, if you enjoy the podcast, tell a friend, share it, like it, subscribe. Keep coming back, and we've got an episode coming out every Thursday.
Yeah, thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching.
See you on the next one.
See you next time.